All right, ready to dive deep into something super cool. We're talking about those tiny cells in your blood, platelets.
They really are fascinating.
Yeah, you sent in some research, and it's amazing. Like, way more interesting than I thought.
Most people don't realize how much is going on at the microscopic level.
Seriously, every time we get a cut, it's a whole intricate process to keep us from bleeding out.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
So we're taking a deep dive into an article called Platelet Adhesion Proteins and Ligands.
Great article.
Yeah, from Assay Genie. It might sound a little intimidating, but trust me, it's worth it.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to learn all about how these tiny cells manage to stick to injury sites and, well, stop us from bleeding, basically.
Like having a microscopic emergency response team on call 247, it's wild.
Okay, so hemostasis, that's the process of stopping bleeding.
Right. A complex chain reaction. The moment a blood vessel is damaged, bam.
And platelets are the first ones there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're like the tiny paramedics of our circulatory system. The article talks all about this process called platelet adhesion.
Platelet adhesion?
Yeah, basically how they cling to the site of an injury. And it all starts with this protein called von Willebrand factor.
Von Willebrand factor, mouthful. So what's that do?
Think of it like scaffolding, forms a sort of net, catches the platelets as they're rushing by in the bloodstream.
So it's like that initial grab so they can actually stick around.
Exactly, exactly. Once they have that foothold, then they can call in the heavy machinery, so to speak.
Ooh, heavy machinery. Okay, I like it.
And that's where the specialized proteins on their surface come in. These are called platelet adhesion proteins.
Ah, so that's what really seals the deal.
Precisely. And there are a few different types of these proteins, each with their own specific role. The article highlights a few of the key players. One is a complex called glycoprotein IB-IX-V.
Okay, try saying that 5 times fast.
Yeah, or GPIb-IX-V for short.
GPIx-V, got it. So what does this complex do?
Well, imagine, you're holding onto a rope
Hmm.
in like a raging river. You need a really strong grip, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's kind of what GPIb-IX-V does. It helps the platelets hold on tight to that von Willebrand factor, the scaffolding.
Yeah.
Especially when the blood is flowing really fast, like in a major artery.
Gotcha. Like a super strong anchor so they don't get swept away.
Exactly. And then there's another protein called GPv6. This was a collagen detector.
Collagen detector.
Collagen is this protein found throughout our tissues, so when a blood vessel's injured, collagen gets exposed.
Ah, so it's like a signal flare, like, hey, come fix this.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. When GPVI binds to collagen, it triggers all these events inside the platelet, getting it ready for action.
So cool.
It is really cool. Scientists are even looking at ways to kind of manipulate this interaction to develop new therapies for thrombosis.
Thrombosis, that's when you get dangerous blood clots, right?
Exactly.
Wow. So by understanding how platelets detect damage, they could prevent those clots from forming in the first place.
That's the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really cutting-edge stuff, but the story doesn't end there.
Okay, so there's more.
Oh, yeah. Once the platelets are activated and holding on to the injury site, they need to actually clump together to form a plug, to stop the bleeding. That's where integrins come in.
Integrins, another protein. Keeping up with all these names is a workout.
It is a lot, but stick with me. It's fascinating. Integrins act like tiny little clasps,
Clasps, okay.
linking the platelets together so they can form a solid barrier.
So first, they adhere to the injury site and then they aggregate to form that plug.
Exactly, exactly. And this whole process, from the initial grab to the final plug, happens incredibly fast. We're talking often within seconds of an injury.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. Like this whole intricate dance of proteins and cells, and we don't even realize it's happening.
It really is.
But what happens when this whole system goes wrong? That's when we start talking about things like thrombosis and bleeding disorders, right?
Yeah, right. Like any complex system, things can go wrong with platelet function. And that's when we run into problems.
Right.
Like any complex system, things can go wrong with platelet function. And that's when we run into problems.
So let's talk about those problems. What happens when the platelet system goes, haywire?
Well, on one hand, you can have platelets that are a bit too enthusiastic, leading to something called thrombosis.
Thrombosis, that's blood clots, right?
Exactly. It's like a traffic jam, but inside your blood vessels. Instead of flowing smoothly, the platelets, they start clumping together, forming these clots that block the flow of blood.
And that can be dangerous, right? I've heard of things like heart attacks and strokes being caused by blood clots.
That's right. If a clot forms in an artery supplying the heart, you can get a heart attack. And if it blocks an artery in the brain, it can lead to a stroke.
So these tiny platelets, the ones we rely on to stop bleeding, can actually become life-threatening. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the platelets being overactive. Sometimes they're not doing their job well enough.
So on the flip side, you can have bleeding disorders
Yeah,
caused by platelets that are kind of underperforming.
exactly. Remember all those key players we were talking about before? Like von Willebrand factor and the GPIb-IX-V complex?
Yeah, the scaffolding and the super strong grip team.
Right. Well, if those components are missing or defective, the platelets can't adhere properly to the injury site. That can lead to, well, excessive bleeding.
So it's like the construction crew showing up, but they don't have the right tools.
That's a great analogy. And there are actually a number of conditions associated with these kinds of deficiencies. One is called Bernard-Soulier syndrome.
Bernard-Soulier syndrome, what causes that?
It's a rare genetic disorder.
Yeah.
Affects the GPIb-IX-V complex, that super strong grip we talked about.
Yeah.
Without it, the platelets can't grab onto the von Willebrand factor effectively, and that can lead to prolonged bleeding, even from minor injuries.
That sounds really challenging to live with.
It can be, yeah. People with Bernard-Soulier syndrome often have to take extra precautions to avoid injury, and they may even need regular transfusions of platelets to help with clotting.
Wow, so it really does impact their day-to-day life. You also mentioned another bleeding disorder earlier, von Willebrand disease, right?
Yes, von Willebrand disease is actually the most common inherited bleeding disorder. About 1% of the population has it.
Wow, that's a lot more common than I thought. What causes von Willebrand disease?
It's caused by a deficiency, or sometimes dysfunction, of the von Willebrand factor itself. Remember, that's the initial scaffolding that helps the platelets stick.
Right.
So without it, or if it's not working properly, the platelets have trouble getting a foothold. And that can lead to, well, more prolonged bleeding.
So it's like the foundation of a house. If the foundation's weak, the whole structure is compromised.
Exactly. And the severity of von Willebrand disease can vary a lot, depending on, well, how much of that factor is present and how well it's actually functioning. Some people might only have mild bleeding symptoms, while others, may have more serious bleeding episodes that require medical attention.
It's amazing how these tiny cells and their, interactions play such a crucial role in our health. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the basics of, platelet adhesion to thrombosis and bleeding disorders. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for these little guys.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And as research continues, we're going to uncover even more, I'm sure, about platelets and their role in our health.
It makes you wonder what other secrets these tiny cells hold. But before we get too carried away with speculation, maybe let's just recap what we've learned today. Can you give us the key takeaways?
Of course.
Yeah.
We started by diving into the world of platelets, these tiny but mighty cells that are so essential for hemostasis, the process of stopping bleeding.
Right. And we learned that they do this through a complex series of steps involving adhesion, activation, and then aggregation, all orchestrated by a whole team of specialized proteins.
Right, we talked about all those key players. Von Willebrand factor, which acts as the initial scaffolding, GPIb-IX-V, which provides that super strong grip, GPVI, which acts as a collagen detector, and integrins, which link the platelets together to form the plug.
And then we explored how, disruptions in this delicate balance can lead to all sorts of problems, ranging from thrombosis and blood clots to bleeding disorders caused by platelet deficiencies.
Exactly. We talked about thrombosis, how it can lead to heart attacks and strokes, and we delved into the challenges of bleeding disorders like Bernard-Soulier syndrome and von Willebrand disease.
It's incredible how much is happening at a microscopic level to keep us healthy, and it's equally amazing how much we've learned about these processes through scientific research. But knowing all this about platelets, how do researchers actually use this knowledge to develop new treatments? It seems like a really complex challenge. It seems like a really complex challenge.
It is complex, but that's what makes it so exciting. Researchers are working on, a variety of approaches, and it all boils down to understanding the specific proteins and pathways involved in platelet function. For bleeding disorders, the goal is to boost platelet activity, essentially help them stick together more effectively.
So how do they do that?
Well, one promising avenue is developing medications that mimic von Willebrand factor.
Oh, okay.
Remember, that's the crucial scaffolding that allows the platelets to latch on.
Right, right.
By providing a synthetic version of this factor, researchers could potentially help patients with von Willebrand disease or other bleeding disorders, help them form clots more efficiently.
That's fascinating. So it's like giving those platelets a little extra help so they can do their job.
Exactly. And on the flip side, for thrombosis, The goal is to find ways to calm the platelets down,
Mm-hmm.
prevent that excessive clotting.
Yeah.
And there are already medications out there called antiplatelet drugs that do just that.
Oh, I've heard of those. How do they work?
Well, they interfere with different stages of platelet activation and aggregation, essentially making the platelets less sticky, so they're less likely to form those dangerous clots.
Huh. So are there like common examples of these?
Sure, aspirin, a very common over-the-counter medication, is actually a type of antiplatelet drug.
Oh, wow. I had no idea aspirin worked that way. So it's kind of like fine-tuning the system, like turning up the volume on platelet activity when it's too low and dialing it back when it's too high.
That's a great way to think about it, yeah. It's all about finding that sweet spot, for optimal blood clotting. Enough to stop bleeding when we need it, but not so much that it causes harm. And the more we learn about these mechanisms of platelet function, the better we'll be able to, develop even more targeted therapies for all these conditions.
It's incredible how understanding these tiny, microscopic processes can lead to such, well, significant advances in treating really serious health conditions. It makes you really appreciate the power of, scientific research.
Absolutely. And we've really only just scratched the surface here. As research continues, we're going to keep uncovering more and more details about these platelets and their role in our overall health. Who knows what amazing breakthroughs are waiting for us in the future?
That's a great point. It makes you wonder what other secrets those tiny cells hold. Well, everyone, there you have it. Another deep dive successfully navigated. We've journeyed into the fascinating world of platelets, learned about their crucial role in hemostasis, all the complexities, and even the potential for groundbreaking treatments. Until next time, remember, there's a whole universe of wonder happening inside you right now, so stay curious and keep exploring.